When the Titanic sank in 1912, it killed over 1,500 people and became the most famous maritime disaster in history. We've all seen the movies, heard the stories, read the books. But here's what almost nobody knows. There was another ship that went down just 3 years later, and it killed nearly twice as many people. Yet you've probably never heard its name. No Hollywood blockbuster, no Leonardo DiCaprio, just silence. Why? That's the question that's going to haunt you by the end of this video. Because the answer reveals something deeply uncomfortable about how we remember tragedy, who we choose to mourn, and why some lives seem to matter more than others in the pages of history. The ship was called the SS Eastland, and on July 24, 1915, it rolled over in the Chicago River while still tied to the dock. 844 people died that morning, most of them drowned in 20 feet of water less than 30 feet from shore. They could see the street. Some were trapped inside, pressed against portholes, watching people watch them die. But here's where it gets even stranger. This disaster happened in the heart of one of America's biggest cities, in broad daylight with thousands of witnesses. So why don't we talk about it? To understand what happened that morning, you need to know what Chicago looked like in 1915. The city was booming. Immigrants from across Europe were pouring in, and one of the biggest employers on the city's west side was the Western Electric Company. They manufactured telephone equipment, and they employed over 40,000 workers. Most of them were young, many were recent immigrants, Czech, Polish, Hungarian families who'd come to America searching for something better. Western Electric was planning their annual employee picnic, and they'd chartered several ships to take workers and their families across Lake Michigan to a park in Michigan City, Indiana. The Eastland was one of those ships. It could hold around 2,500 passengers, and that morning, people started boarding around 6:30 a.m. They were excited, dressed in their best clothes. Parents held children's hands, young couples laughed together. This was supposed to be a day of joy. But the Eastland had a problem. Actually, it had always had a problem. The ship was top-heavy and notoriously unstable. It had a history of listing to one side, and sailors who knew the vessel called it cranky. There had been multiple close calls before, moments when the ship tilted dangerously before being stabilized. Naval architects had warned about its design, but nothing had been done. The ship kept sailing. Now here's where the story takes a dark turn that connects directly back to the Titanic. After the Titanic sank in 1912, there was international outrage. How could a ship go down with so few lifeboats? The tragedy sparked new maritime safety laws. In 1915, just months before the Eastland disaster, new federal regulations required ships to carry more lifeboats and life rafts. Sounds reasonable, right? The problem was that these additional lifeboats were heavy, and they were mounted on the upper decks. On a ship that was already dangerously top-heavy, this extra weight was catastrophic. So the very law designed to prevent another Titanic may have directly caused an even deadlier disaster. That morning, as passengers packed onto the Eastland, the ship began listing, first slightly to port, then back. The crew tried to stabilize it by adjusting water in the ballast tanks. But with thousands of people moving around on deck, many crowding to one side to wave at friends on the dock, the ship became increasingly unstable. At 7:28 a.m., the Eastland suddenly rolled onto its side. It happened fast. Witnesses described hearing a sound like thunder as furniture, pianos, and refrigerators slid across the ship. On deck, people tumbled into the river. But the real horror was below deck. Hundreds of passengers had been inside, in the cabin areas and lower decks. When the ship capsized, they were trapped. Water rushed in through open portholes and doorways. People clawed at walls, fought through narrow passageways that were now sideways or upside down, drowned in inches of water because they couldn't find which way was up. The rescue effort was immediate but chaotic. People on the dock threw ropes, pieces of wood, anything that might float. Nearby ships sent help. Divers went down into the wreckage. But the Eastland had settled on its side in the river, creating a maze of compartments and corridors. Bodies floated in dark spaces. Some victims were pulled out hours later. The morgue at the 2nd Regiment Armory couldn't handle the volume. Bodies were lined up in rows. Families moved between them, searching for faces they recognized. Entire families were gone. 22 complete households were wiped out that day. The final death toll was 844 people. And here's the detail that makes it even more heartbreaking. 844 was more than the number who died on the Lusitania, which had been torpedoed by a German submarine just 2 months earlier. The Eastland killed more people than the Iroquois Theater fire in 1903, which had been Chicago's worst disaster until that point. It remains the deadliest shipwreck disaster in Great Lakes history and one of the deadliest maritime disasters in U.S. history. More Americans died on the Eastland than on the Titanic. But you probably didn't know that. Most people don't.
So, why the silence? Why does the Titanic live in cultural memory while the Eastland faded into obscurity? Part of the answer is timing. The Titanic sank in the middle of the Atlantic, surrounded by mystery and the drama of a maiden voyage. The Eastland capsized in a river, in a city, on a Saturday morning. There was no iceberg, no grand narrative of hubris and fate, just a preventable accident caused by design flaws and regulatory oversight. But there's something else, something we need to talk about. The people who died on the Titanic included some of the wealthiest individuals in the world: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidore and Ida Strauss. Their deaths were news. The people who died on the Eastland were working-class immigrants, factory workers. Their names didn't echo in halls of power. Their stories didn't sell newspapers the same way. And in the collective memory of America, their tragedy was easier to forget. Within weeks of the disaster, Chicago was already moving on. Western Electric helped cover funeral costs and set up a relief fund, but there was no massive cultural reckoning. The ship's captain and several crew members were charged, but no one was ever convicted. The owners blamed the crew blamed the design, the designers blamed the regulations. Everyone pointed fingers, and no one was held accountable. Today, there's a small plaque near the site where the Eastland capsized. Some historians have worked to keep the memory alive. There's a memorial in a cemetery in Forest Park, Illinois, where many victims are buried. But these efforts feel small compared to the scale of the loss. Meanwhile, the Titanic has museums, countless books, multiple films, and a permanent place in how we understand disaster and heroism. What the Eastland teaches us isn't just about maritime safety or engineering failures. It's about whose stories get told, whose lives are deemed worth remembering. History isn't neutral. It's shaped by power, by class, by who controls the narrative. The same society that obsesses over one tragedy can erase another, not through malice necessarily, but through neglect, through the quiet assumption that some lives resonate more than others. And that matters today, because we're still making the same choices. We're still deciding which disasters to care about, which victims to mourn, which stories deserve to be told. Every time we scroll past news of a migrant boat capsizing, every time we treat distant suffering as background noise, we're repeating the pattern that buried the Eastland. 844 people died on a beautiful summer morning in 1915. They died because a ship was poorly designed, because regulations were passed without understanding their consequences, because profit mattered more than safety, because nobody wanted to take responsibility until it was too late. Their deaths should have changed everything. Instead, they were forgotten. But you know now. You know their names were real, their lives mattered, and maybe in some small way, remembering them changes how you see the tragedies happening around us today, the ones we notice and the ones we don't. That's the real lesson of the Eastland. Not just that tragedy can strike anywhere, anytime, but that forgetting is a choice, and so is remembering. Thank you for listening. This is Ren, and until next time when we uncover more hidden history and what-if stories.